The sun hung low over the vast plains, casting long golden shadows across the rolling hills. Dust rose with every step of the cowboy's horse. The familiar creak of the saddle under him, a constant companion. He had been riding for days, the weight of his gear pressing against his back, his muscles sore from hours in the saddle. The wind carried a dry, earthy scent, and the quiet was broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling above. This solitude, which he had once cherished, now felt heavy, almost oppressive. Life on the trail was never easy. But after so many years, it had begun to feel repetitive, predictable, and somehow hollow. He was a man of few words, not because he disliked speaking, but because words had always seemed insufficient. Out here, in the wild, there was a certain honesty in silence. A man had to rely on his instincts, his senses, his ability to survive. Yet today, even his instincts seemed restless, as though the open land itself was whispering that something unusual lay ahead. As the cowboy rode closer to a low ridge, he noticed movement near the edge of the forest. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a ripple of heat, or a shadow playing on the grass. But as he squinted against the setting sun, he saw her. She was standing near a small cluster of trees, her posture calm, almost regal, as if she belonged to the land itself. Her hair, dark and flowing, caught the last rays of the sun, and her eyes, sharp and observant, seemed to measure him from a distance. He froze for a moment, gripping the reins tightly. He had seen many travelers, settlers, and strangers in his life. But this was different. There was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity, and a quiet confidence that unsettled him more than any danger ever had. For years, he had learned to expect hostility from strangers, especially in the frontier lands where misunderstandings could turn deadly. Yet here was someone who radiated strength without threat, someone who seemed completely at ease in her own skin. The cowboy debated what to do. Part of him wanted to turn away, to ride past and leave the encounter to chance. He was weary, and he had long learned that caution was often the safest path. But another part of him, the part that had been quietly starving for something different, something meaningful, urged him to stay. There was something in her gaze, something unspoken, that drew him forward. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he nudged his horse down the gentle slope toward the small settlement that lay just beyond the trees. The settlement was modest, made up of simple structures that blended into the environment. Smoke rose from small fires, carrying the scent of cooking meat and herbs. Chickens clucked softly, and a few children ran past, their laughter light and carefree. It was a picture of daily life, ordinary and serene, yet it held a rhythm and harmony he had never known in his own lonely travels. The cowboy dismounted cautiously, leaving the horse tethered to a post near the edge of the clearing. His boots crunched softly on the dry grass as he approached. Every sense was alert, every movement deliberate. He was aware of the eyes upon him. Not just hers, but others hidden among the trees and dwellings. Watching, assessing. He had been through many encounters in his life, some friendly, some not, but this felt different. There was an unspoken understanding that he was entering a space that demanded respect, a space where appearances and assumptions could not lead. When he reached her, she smiled, though it was not a smile meant to charm or flatter. It was a simple, knowing smile, the kind that comes from someone who understands life on a deeper level. She nodded in greeting, and he returned the gesture, unsure what words, if any, were appropriate. Silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but deliberate. "You have been traveling far," she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight, as if she had seen the weariness in him from miles away. He nodded, unsure what to say in return. Words seemed inadequate to describe the exhaustion, the endless miles, the sense of wandering without purpose that had haunted him lately. "You look tired," she added. "Come, rest." She gestured toward a shaded area near a stream that trickled softly through the settlement. The sound of water was soothing, almost hypnotic, and the cowboy felt a tension he hadn't realized he carried begin to ease. He followed, his movements careful, respectful, aware that every step he took mattered in this delicate dance of first impressions. As he settled near the stream, he watched her move with grace and purpose. She collected herbs, arranging them with care. Her hands, precise yet gentle, every action seemed intentional, every gesture a reflection of knowledge and patience. The cowboy found himself studying her, noting the ease with which she worked, the serenity in her movements. He realized he had spent most of his life rushing, reacting, surviving, without ever truly observing. Here was someone who seemed to understand the rhythm of life itself, and he could not help but feel a quiet admiration. For a long while, they sat in silence, the sounds of the settlement filling the space between them. Birds called from the trees, children's laughter drifted across the clearing, and the gentle ripple of the stream provided a constant, calming presence. The cowboy felt a strange mix of unease and comfort. He was a man used to solitude, yet in this quiet community, he felt the stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in years. Curiosity, connection, even a sense of belonging, however fleeting. Eventually, she spoke again, her question simple, yet unexpected. "Do you enjoy it?" Her eyes met his, calm and unwavering, waiting for an answer that was not about the landscape or the journey, but about life itself. The cowboy froze. The question was not one he had been asked before. He had spent years surviving, working, riding, and enduring. But he had rarely been asked to reflect on his own feelings, on his own satisfaction with life. The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. What could he say? He had not thought about enjoyment. Not in any deliberate way. He had taken pride in his resilience, in his ability to endure, in his reputation as a skilled cowboy. But enjoyment? That was foreign, almost a luxury he could not remember. As he struggled with his thoughts, he noticed the subtle ways she observed him, not judgmentally, but with interest, as if she could see beyond the surface into the core of who he was. Her presence was disarming, yet comforting, like a gentle hand guiding him toward a truth he had long ignored. Time seemed to slow. The sun dipped further below the horizon, casting the settlement in warm, golden hues. The cowboy's mind wandered through memories of long rides under the scorching sun, nights by the campfire, moments of danger and survival. He realized that in all those years, he had never paused to consider whether he truly enjoyed his path, whether the choices he had made brought him any real contentment. The question resonated deeper than he expected. It was not merely about happiness, it was about awareness, presence, and the courage to confront one's own life honestly. For the first time in a long while, the cowboy felt a stirring of reflection, a spark of curiosity about what it might mean to truly live, rather than merely survive. He remained silent, unsure how to respond, yet aware that the question itself had already begun to change him. The Apache woman watched patiently, giving him the space to find his own thoughts, to wrestle with a realization he had avoided for years. Her calm presence and steady gaze created a rare sense of safety, allowing him to confront the unfamiliar territory within himself. As night fell, the settlement glowed softly with firelight, casting long shadows across the simple structures. The cowboy sat near the stream, staring into the water, and for the first time, he considered the idea that life could be more than endless travel, more than survival, more than the routines he had clung to. There was something to be learned here, something to be discovered beyond the horizon of his own experience. Though he did not speak, the cowboy felt a subtle shift inside him. The encounter, brief as it seemed, had already begun to unsettle him in the most profound way. He realized that meeting this woman, stepping into this settlement, and facing a question that went beyond words, was the beginning of a journey unlike any he had undertaken before. A journey not measured in miles or survival, but in understanding, reflection, and the courage to confront his own life honestly. And as he sat quietly by the stream, he understood that he had crossed a threshold. The open plains had always defined him. But now, the presence of the Apache woman, her calm strength, and her simple, unassuming question had opened a door within him, a door to something unknown, something real, something that might, for the first time, allow him to truly experience life, rather than merely endure it. The next morning, the cowboy awoke to a gentle light filtering through the trees. Birds were singing softly, and the air carried the sweet, earthy scent of the settlement. After a night of dew and quiet, for a moment, he lay still, listening to the sounds around him. It was different from the loneliness of his camps on the plains. Here, the air seemed alive with purpose, each sound a part of a rhythm he had never noticed before. He rose slowly, brushing dust and sleep from his worn clothes. The previous day's events replayed in his mind: the unexpected meeting, the strange question, the calm presence of the woman who had already unsettled him more than any danger he had faced. He had never been challenged like this, not with weapons or words, but with a single question that forced him to examine his life. "Do you enjoy it?" The words lingered, echoing in his mind as he walked toward the stream to wash his face and clear his thoughts. When he reached the edge of the settlement, he saw her again. She was tending to a small garden, her hands moving deftly among the plants, gently pruning leaves, collecting herbs, and arranging them carefully. Every movement was deliberate, yet graceful, as if she were performing a quiet ceremony. She noticed him immediately and smiled, that same knowing smile that both comforted and unsettled him. "You're up early," she said, her voice soft but steady. There was no judgment, only observation. He nodded, unsure of what to say. Words had always been a tool for survival, for him simple, practical, and often harsh. But here, they felt inadequate. He simply replied, "I couldn't sleep much." It was true. Sleep had come in short bursts, filled with dreams of open plains, long roads, and the questions that now haunted him. She gestured toward the garden. "Come, help me." The cowboy hesitated. He had never done this kind of work, never cared much for tasks that required patience or precision. He was a man of action, of movement, accustomed to the fast pace of life on the trail. But something about her invitation felt different. It was not a demand or a command. It was a gentle offer, an opening to a world he had never explored. He stepped closer and began to mimic her movements. At first, his hands were clumsy, breaking small stems or dropping herbs. She corrected him quietly, showing him the right way. Her patience endless. He watched her closely, learning not only her technique but the calm attention she gave to each task. There was a rhythm to it, a connection between her, the plants, and the earth beneath them that he had never considered. As they worked side by side, she spoke again. "You seemed surprised yesterday." He looked up, unsure how to answer. I didn't expect your question," he admitted. She laughed softly, a sound like wind rustling through leaves. "It was not meant to trap you. It was meant to make you think." He frowned slightly, the words stirring something deep inside him. He had spent most of his life moving from place to place, enduring hardships and surviving, but rarely reflecting on what he truly wanted. Her question had touched a part of him he had long ignored, the part that had been buried under years of duty, routine, and survival. They continued working in silence for a while. The cowboy found himself watching her, noticing small details he would have overlooked in the past, the way her fingers moved gently over the plants, the way she paused to listen to the wind, the subtle strength in her posture. There was a harmony in her life that he had never experienced, a balance between action and observation, between labor and contemplation. After some time, she asked another question, equally simple but profound. "Do you feel at home anywhere?" He froze again. He had never thought about it. He had traveled countless miles, seen hundreds of towns and settlements. Yet he had never felt truly at home. He had never stayed in one place long enough to belong, never trusted that he could. He realized, with a quiet pang, that he had been running from something, or perhaps toward nothing, for most of his life. I don't know," he admitted, his voice low. I've never felt it. She nodded, not with judgment, but with understanding. Home is not always a place, she said softly. Sometimes it is a feeling. Sometimes it is found in people, in work, in the way you care for what surrounds you. The cowboy considered her words, realizing that she was describing a truth he had never acknowledged. His life had been measured by distance, survival, and the approval of others, but never by the simple, quiet joys of presence and care. For the first time, he wondered if there was more to life than the endless miles and the harsh routine of a cowboy's existence. Days passed in a rhythm he had never known. Each morning, he helped with tasks around the settlement, gathering firewood, repairing structures, tending to the animals. Each day, he observed her, learning not only her ways but also the ways of the community around her. He noticed how people worked together, how they shared responsibilities, and how they celebrated small victories and supported each other in challenges. With every passing day, the cowboy began to feel a subtle transformation. His body, once tense with the constant alertness of survival, began to relax. His mind, once focused solely on the next task, began to wander in reflection. And his heart, once guarded and solitary, began to open to the possibility of connection, understanding, and even belonging. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, he sat with her near the stream again. The water glimmered with the last light of day, and the gentle sound of flowing water was calming. She looked at him with her steady gaze, and for a moment, neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. The silence was filled with understanding, the kind that comes from shared experience and mutual respect. Finally, she asked, "Do you enjoy being here?" The question struck him deeply. He realized that he had come to care for the settlement, for its rhythm, for the people within it. He realized that he had come to enjoy the simple tasks, the quiet moments, and the feeling of being part of something larger than himself. He looked at her, searching for the right words, and found that the answer was not simple, but honest. "Yes," he said finally, his voice quiet but sincere. "I think I do." She smiled, a warm, approving smile that seemed to lighten the air around them. It was not a smile of triumph, but of recognition that he had begun to see life differently, that he had begun to open himself to experiences he had never allowed before. In the days that followed, the cowboy's transformation continued. He found joy in small things, the taste of fresh water, the feel of earth beneath his hands, the laughter of children playing nearby. He discovered patience in work, strength in observation, and courage in connection. Each moment, each task, each conversation brought him closer to a life he had never imagined for himself. The Apache woman remained a steady presence, guiding him without forcing him, teaching without lecturing, and challenging him without judgment. Through her, he began to understand that true strength was not in isolation or survival, but in awareness, empathy, and the courage to face oneself honestly. One morning, while helping her repair a fence along the edge of the settlement, she asked another question. This time, more personal. "What do you fear most?" The cowboy paused, considering the question. He had faced many dangers in his life, storms, wild animals, hostile strangers, but he realized that the fear he carried most deeply was not of external threats. It was the fear of emptiness. The fear of realizing that his life had been lived without true purpose or reflection. "I fear that I've wasted my life without knowing it," he admitted finally. She nodded thoughtfully. "It is never too late to learn, to change, to discover a new path," she said. "Even a life that seems lost can find meaning if one is willing to see it." Her words resonated in him, offering a strange comfort. He realized that he was at a crossroads. Not just in this moment, but in the trajectory of his life. He could return to the roads he had traveled for years, continuing as he always had. Or he could choose something new, something unknown, something that required courage, reflection, and openness. As the sun climbed higher, casting light over the settlement, he felt a quiet determination growing within him. The journey he had been on was not only one of miles and survival, it was now a journey of the heart, mind, and spirit. He understood that to truly live, he would have to embrace the lessons before him, to learn from those around him, and to allow himself to experience life fully, without fear or hesitation. By the end of the week, the cowboy had become more than a visitor. He was beginning to understand the rhythm of the settlement, the flow of daily life, and the subtle ways in which the Apache woman and her community approached the world. He was learning patience, observation, care, and reflection skills he had never valued before, but now recognized as essential to a life truly worth living. And through it all, the question remained, quietly guiding him. Do you enjoy it? It was no longer just a question, it was a doorway, a challenge, and a reminder. It was a question that required him to confront himself, to see beyond survival, to recognize joy, connection, and meaning where he had once only seen distance, danger, and solitude. For the first time in his life, the cowboy felt the stirring of transformation not just in his actions, but in his heart, his mind, and his soul. And he knew that whatever came next, he would never be the same. The days turned into weeks, and the cowboy began to feel life differently than he ever had before. Each morning, he woke to the soft light filtering through the trees, the hum of birdsong, and the gentle sounds of the settlement coming alive. He had grown accustomed to the routines here, the smell of fresh bread baking, the low murmur of conversation as people worked together, and the quiet laughter of children as they chased one another across the clearing. It was a rhythm he had never known, and it filled a space in him that he had long thought empty. He found himself rising early without thought, carrying water from the stream, tending to the small garden, and helping repair the simple structures that dotted the settlement. The work was hard at times, and his hands grew calloused. But unlike the endless labor of a cattle drive or the back-breaking work on the plains, this labor had purpose beyond survival. Each task mattered, each contribution helped someone else, and each day ended with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The Apache woman continued to guide him gently. She never criticized, never demanded, and never rushed him. Instead, she showed him patience, the kind that comes from understanding life deeply. And through her, he began to understand it too. Her presence was steady, like the earth itself, grounded, unwavering, and full of quiet strength. Watching her work, he began to notice details he had never seen before. The way she handled each plant with care, the subtle ways she listened to the wind, and the small rituals that gave meaning to each day. One afternoon, she asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Do you ever think about what you truly want?" He froze, unsure how to answer. He had spent his life making choices out of necessity, survival, and expectation, never out of desire or reflection. I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I've never thought about it like that." She smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "Then it is time to think. To ask yourself, not what the world expects, but what your heart desires. Life is too short to live without understanding yourself." Her words lingered, echoing in his mind. For the first time, he began to consider that his life did not have to be dictated solely by routine or survival, that perhaps there was room for choice, for reflection, for change. It was an idea both thrilling and frightening. To consider a different path was to question everything he had known about himself, to confront fears he had long buried beneath the dust of the plains. As the days passed, the cowboy found himself drawn more deeply into the life of the settlement. He discovered the joy of simple work, the feeling of earth under his hands, the satisfaction of repairing something with care, and the quiet pride in helping others. He began to enjoy conversations with the children, answering their endless questions and telling stories of his travels, though he realized that even his tales were now colored by the lessons he was learning here. One evening, after a long day of work, the cowboy and the Apache woman sat near the stream, watching the water reflect the fading light of the sun. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and herbs. She looked at him thoughtfully and asked, "Do you feel different than when you arrived?" He paused, considering. The question was simple, yet it carried immense weight. He thought about his earlier life, the endless miles, the harsh conditions, the isolation, and the loneliness. He realized that he had changed. He had learned patience, understanding, and reflection. He had begun to care deeply for others, for the land, and for life itself. "Yes," he said finally, "I do feel different. I see things differently now." Her eyes softened, and she nodded. "Good. Change is not always easy, but it is necessary. It is through change that we grow." The cowboy felt a quiet pride, not in the work he had done or the skills he had learned, but in the fact that he had opened himself to something new, something unknown, something that had once seemed impossible. For the first time, he felt he had a choice in his life, a chance to step off the path of endless wandering and create something meaningful. One day, a traveler arrived at the settlement. He was a man from a nearby town, weary from the road and carrying news of trouble in the surrounding areas. The cowboy watched as the Apache woman welcomed the traveler, listening carefully, offering food and rest without judgment. He realized that this simple act of hospitality was a lesson in courage, trust, and empathy. It was not just about surviving, but about living with integrity, kindness, and awareness. The encounter sparked something within him. He realized that he could take these lessons with him, that his life could have purpose beyond the horizon, beyond the endless miles of isolation he had once embraced. He felt a growing responsibility not only to himself but to those around him, to contribute, to care, and to live fully. As the days turned into weeks, the cowboy faced moments of doubt. He wondered if he truly belonged here, if he could ever fully embrace a life so different from the one he had known. But each time, the Apache woman's steady presence reminded him that growth required courage, that true change demanded reflection and persistence. Slowly, he began to trust himself, to trust his instincts, and to embrace the possibilities before him. One evening, while repairing a section of fencing near the edge of the settlement, the cowboy realized that he was no longer acting out of obligation or routine. He was acting with purpose, guided by understanding, patience, and care. Each nail he hammered, each post he set, each task he completed was a reflection of the lessons he had learned. That life was not just about survival, but about presence, connection, and respect. He began to notice subtle changes in himself. His thoughts were clearer, his emotions more balanced, and his heart lighter. He laughed more freely, smiled more often, and felt a sense of contentment he had never known. The fear and tension that had accompanied him for years on the trail were slowly giving way to a calm awareness, a quiet joy in simply being alive and present. One afternoon, as he walked along the edge of the settlement, he saw her tending to a small fire. Smoke rose gently into the sky, carrying the scent of herbs and food. She looked up and asked, "Do you feel ready to make a choice?" He stopped, considering her question carefully. He knew what she meant. He could return to the life he had known, the endless travel, the isolation, the survival, or he could embrace this new path, uncertain as it was, and allow himself to become part of something meaningful, something real, something that mattered. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of possibility, of hope, of new beginnings. He looked at her, and for the first time, he felt the courage to answer honestly. "I am ready," he said. The Apache woman smiled, a smile that radiated warmth, approval, and quiet pride. She knew that this decision was monumental, that it required bravery, trust, and openness. By choosing to stay, he was not just embracing a new life, he was embracing himself, his potential, and the lessons he had learned about patience, empathy, and reflection. Over the next days, the cowboy settled more fully into the life of the settlement. He learned more about the traditions, the daily practices, and the subtle wisdom embedded in each action. He listened to stories of the land, of ancestors, and of the balance between humans and nature. He began to understand the depth of knowledge and respect that guided every decision, every action, every moment. The people of the settlement began to accept him as one of their own. They saw his efforts, his sincerity, and his willingness to learn, and they responded with trust, support, and kindness. He was no longer a lone traveler, a man defined by miles and survival, but someone connected, respected, and valued. Through it all, the Apache woman remained by his side, guiding him, teaching him, and challenging him in subtle ways. She asked questions, offered insights, and encouraged reflection. Her presence was a constant reminder of the path he had chosen, the transformation he had undertaken, and the life he was now creating. One evening, as the sun set and the sky glowed with soft shades of pink and orange, he stood at the edge of the settlement, looking out over the plains he had once roamed freely. The wind carried the scent of the land, the sound of the stream, and the distant laughter of children playing. For the first time, he felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging, and a deep awareness of the life he had chosen. He realized that the unthinkable act he had taken, choosing to stay, choosing to learn, choosing to embrace a life so different from his past, had transformed him completely. He was no longer defined by the miles he had traveled, the hardships he had endured, or the solitude he had embraced. He was defined by his choices, his understanding, and the connections he had forged. And as he turned to look at the Apache woman, who watched him quietly with her steady gaze, he felt a quiet gratitude for her, for the settlement, for the lessons, and for the journey that had brought him here. He understood that life was not simply about survival or endurance. It was about presence, reflection, connection, and the courage to embrace change. For the first time, he truly felt alive. The days in the settlement grew calm yet vibrant, each moment filled with purpose and connection. The cowboy had learned to rise with the sun, to work with care, and to observe the small but meaningful rhythms of life around him. What had once been a life of endless movement and survival now felt like a life of presence, where each action mattered, where every interaction carried significance, and where each day offered lessons he had never known on the open plains. He found himself no longer thinking about the miles he had traveled or the hardships he had endured. Those experiences still shaped him, but they no longer defined him. He had discovered a life that was richer, not because it was easier, but because it demanded awareness, compassion, and courage. He had learned that strength was not measured by solitude or endurance alone, but by the ability to grow, to reflect, and to connect with others. The Apache woman continued to guide him, but now in ways that were subtler. Her lessons were woven into daily life: how to notice small changes in the weather, how to prepare meals with care, how to work together with others to achieve common goals. She asked questions that encouraged reflection, reminding him that life was as much about inner understanding as it was about action. One morning, as he gathered herbs by the stream, she asked him, "Do you feel at peace with yourself?" He paused, looking at the gentle flow of water. He thought about the fear, the loneliness, and the doubt he had carried for so long, and compared it to the calm and satisfaction he now felt. "Yes," he said softly, "I think I do. For the first time, I feel like I am exactly where I need to be." Her eyes softened with approval. "Good. That is the reward of learning and understanding. Peace is not given, it is earned. Through reflection, effort, and openness to life." The cowboy realized that peace did not come from avoiding hardship, but from embracing it, learning from it, and choosing to grow. He understood that he had been given a rare opportunity to step off the familiar path of isolation and risk, and to embrace a life that demanded courage of a different kind. The courage to face oneself, to acknowledge mistakes, and to choose meaningful action. As the weeks continued, he became more integrated into the settlement. The children began to look up to him, asking him to teach them skills he had long thought trivial. He taught them how to ride safely, how to care for animals, and how to observe the land with patience. Yet, as he taught, he realized he was learning even more from their curiosity, their joy, and their ability to appreciate small things. The adults of the settlement also began to trust him fully. They involved him in discussions about repairs, planning for the future, and making important decisions. Each time, he felt the weight of responsibility, but also the satisfaction of contributing to something greater than himself. He had become part of a community, not just by living among them, but by participating actively, with respect, care, and integrity. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in warm golds and deep purples, the cowboy and the Apache woman walked along the ridge overlooking the plains. The wind carried the familiar scent of grass and earth, and the quiet rustle of trees was soothing. They walked side by side, comfortable in silence, each step measured and mindful. "You have changed," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Not because the world forced you to, but because you chose to." He looked at her, feeling the truth of her words. He realized she was right. His choice to stay, to learn, and to embrace life differently had transformed him. He was no longer the solitary traveler who moved from one place to another without purpose. He was a man aware of himself, connected to others, and willing to engage with life fully, even with its uncertainties. "I feel different," he admitted. "I've learned things I never imagined I could. I've felt things I never allowed myself to feel. And I've found peace, I think. A peace I never knew existed." She nodded, her expression calm and approving. "That is the gift of understanding. Life is not about control or certainty. It is about presence, courage, and the willingness to grow." The cowboy reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The open plains, the endless miles, the hardships of the trail they had shaped him, yes. But they had not given him understanding. That understanding came from here, from this settlement, from her guidance, and from his own courage to face himself honestly. As time passed, he began to take on more responsibilities. He helped organize the work for the community, taught skills he had mastered, and ensured that tasks were done efficiently and carefully. But he did so with patience, not urgency, and with care, not detachment. He had learned that efficiency without presence was empty, and action without understanding was hollow. Each task became an opportunity to practice mindfulness, compassion, and reflection. One afternoon, while repairing a roof with the help of other settlers, he paused to look out across the plains. The wind brushed his face, carrying memories of his travels and the harsh solitude of his past. And yet, for the first time, those memories did not weigh heavily on him. They were part of his story, part of the journey that had led him here, and part of the lessons he now carried in his heart. He smiled quietly to himself, realizing that he could honor his past while embracing his present fully. The Apache woman approached him, carrying a small bundle of herbs. "Do you know why you were able to change?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Because I wanted to? Because I chose to?" She nodded. "Yes. Change cannot be forced. It cannot be demanded. It must come from within. And you allowed it to." Her words reminded him of the question that had started everything. "Do you enjoy it?" He had once frozen at that question, unsure how to answer. Now, he realized that it had been the beginning of a journey that led him here to understanding, to connection, and to peace. As the days continued, he found joy in even the smallest things. The laughter of children, the smell of fresh bread, the satisfaction of a repaired fence, the quiet moments by the stream. Each moment became an opportunity to appreciate life, to be present, and to contribute. He had discovered that true happiness was not found in adventure alone, or in survival, but in engagement, reflection, and connection. One evening, under a sky filled with stars, the cowboy sat with the Apache woman near the fire. The settlement was quiet, the children asleep, and the adults finishing their day's work. The fire crackled gently, casting a warm glow over their faces. "You have truly embraced this life," she said softly. He nodded. "Yes. I have learned that life is more than survival. It is about understanding, connection, and presence. I have found joy in work, peace in reflection, and fulfillment in being part of something larger than myself." She smiled, a smile full of quiet pride. "And that is the greatest lesson of all. You have discovered what it means to live, not merely to exist." The cowboy felt a deep gratitude for her guidance, for the community, and for the journey that had brought him here. He understood now that life was a series of choices, each with the power to shape who we are and who we become. His choice to stay, to learn, and to embrace a new path had transformed him completely. The night grew darker, and the stars shone brighter. He felt a sense of belonging he had never known, a sense of purpose that went beyond his past, and a sense of peace that filled his heart. For the first time, he realized that he was not just surviving, not just enduring, but truly living. The Apache woman watched him quietly, knowing that he had embraced the lessons fully, that he had reflected, grown, and chosen a path that required courage and openness. She knew that he had found something rare, a life lived with awareness, connection, and joy. As the fire burned low, the cowboy looked out over the plains, not with longing or fear, but with gratitude and understanding. The wide open land he had once traversed alone now felt different. It was no longer a place of isolation or survival, but a reminder of the journey that had led him here, to understanding, connection, and peace. He thought of the question that had started it all. Do you enjoy it? And now, for the first time, he could answer with certainty not only about the settlement, or the work, or the people, but about life itself. Yes, he enjoyed it. Every moment, every lesson, every connection, every challenge, it all mattered. He had discovered the joy of being present, of caring, of learning, and of living fully. And in that moment, he felt complete not because life was perfect, but because he had embraced it fully. With courage, awareness, and an open heart, he had chosen the unthinkable, and in doing so, had found a life worth living. He looked at the Apache woman one last time that night, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Words were unnecessary. The journey, the lessons, and the transformation spoke for themselves. He had crossed a threshold, leaving behind a life defined by distance and survival, and stepping into one defined by reflection, connection, and fulfillment. And as the stars shimmered above, the cowboy knew that he would never forget this place, these people, and the lessons that had changed him forever. He had found joy, he had found peace, and he had found a life worth living, a life that was no longer unthinkable, but beautifully real.